Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 1 p.m. We're going to call the November 8th meeting of the Planning Advisory Committee to order. And at this time, if I could have a motion to adopt the agenda. Deputy Mayor Richardson, seconded by Mayor Elmsley. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Any declarations of pecuniary interest in today's meeting? Seeing none. We'll move right into item number 3, public meeting reports. As required under the Planning Act, a public meeting is being held prior to the committee making a recommendation on these applications. All recommendations that come out of this afternoon's meeting will be forwarded to the next regular council meeting of November 21st, 2023. The purpose of this public hearing is to allow the committee to gather information on the applications before us, to hear those wishing to make submissions on applications, and to allow the committee to ask questions of the applicants, interested parties, and staff. Everyone speaking today is requested to state their name for the public record, and in the interest of time, the committee respectfully asks to keep your comments to no more than 5 minutes. When the appropriate time comes, after the planner makes their presentation, members of the public will be provided an opportunity to speak to any public meeting items on the agenda. At that point, please either unmute yourself and turn on your video, or come to the podium and press the speak button to activate the microphone. And with that, we will start with item 3.1, Plan 2023-061, an application to amend the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw 94-07 at 238 Black School Road. Matt Alexander, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I am the team lead for project manager for WSP, providing planning services. However, my associate, Caitlin Martin, will be leading the presentation.
Thanks, Matt.
Sure.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Caitlin Martin. As Matt mentioned, we are with WSP. We have been retained to provide planning services on behalf of City of Kawartha Lakes Planning Division. In front of you today is a zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by Clark Consulting Services for the property municipally known as 238 Black School Road in the Township of Mariposa. The property is designated as prime agricultural under the city's official plan. The property is zoned as agricultural A1 zone in the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw 94-07 as amended. The purpose of this zoning bylaw amendment application is to fulfill conditions of provisional consent approval, which was granted on February 16th, 2023. The consent application proposed to sever a 0.81 hectare surplus farm dwelling parcel from roughly 40 hectares of retained agricultural land, which is also to be consolidated with a non-abutting agricultural parcel. As a condition of consent, the retained agricultural land is to be rezoned to prohibit future residential uses. This particular application also proposes to rezone the severed surplus farm dwelling parcel to recognize the new lot size and configuration and residential use. In support of the application, we received a severance sketch, a zoning sketch, a planning justification report, along with a complete application and conditions and a copy of the conditions of provisional consent approval. In accordance with the Planning Act requirements, notice was circulated to residents within 500 meters of the subject site, and the application was also circulated to relevant external agencies and internal departments, such as Development Engineering, Building and Septic Division, the Kawartha Conservation Authority, and Economic Development. Diving into some of the policy framework, under the growth plan, there is a framework provided for long-term protection of prime agricultural lands. This particular application meets the growth plan's criteria for new lot creation outside of settlement areas, in that the use is compatible with the surrounding rural area and landscape. It will be sustained by rural service levels, and there will be no adverse effects to existing and surrounding agricultural uses. The rezoning of the retained agricultural lands to prohibit residential uses as a condition of consent is consistent with the intent of the growth plan policies to protect agricultural lands. The provincial policy statement also prescribes policies regarding the protection of prime agricultural lands. Under the PPS, lot creation is permitted for a resident's surplus to a farming operation as part of farm consolidation, provided that future residential use is prohibited on the retained lands. This particular application meets this PPS criteria by prohibiting future residential uses on the retained agricultural lands. Under the city's official plan, this site is also designated as prime agricultural. The city's official plan prescribes criteria regarding the severing of a dwelling surplus to a farming operation, provided that certain criteria are met. In this case, this proposal meets that criteria and that the severed lot does not exceed 1 hectare. The severed surplus farm dwelling is not required for farm employees. And in this case, there are no concerns with MDS setbacks, as an MDS setback is not required for associated rezonings of a severed or retained parcels for severances associated with a resident's surplus to a farming operation. This rezoning will prohibit future residential uses on the retained agricultural lands, preserving the agricultural use. The subject site is also zoned as agricultural A1 zone under the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone the retained agricultural lands from the A1 agricultural zone to agricultural exception 41. This exception zone will be implemented to ultimately prohibit future residential uses on the retained lands. In conjunction, the severed surplus farm dwelling lot will be rezoned from the A1 agricultural zone to the rural residential type 1 zone to recognize the new lot size as a result of the severance. In both cases, the retained and the severed lands meet the requirements of both the A1 parent zone and the rural residential type 1 zone. Following circulation of the application, comments were received from development engineering and building and septic plans examiner, who indicated there was no issues with the proposed rezoning. Following writing of the staff report, supervisor from Part 8 sewage systems also provided comments indicating that the private services review was completed through the consent process, and as such, there are no issues. As of writing the staff report, there was no comments received from the public. However, following issuance of the staff report, one comment from a resident was received. This resident merely just requested clarification on the nature of the application. In summary, staff feel that the zoning bylaw amendment application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the growth plan, and conforms to the policies of the official plan. Staff also believe that the rezoning is appropriate and will fulfill the conditions of provisional consent approval. As such, staff respectfully recommend that the draft zoning bylaw amendment included as Appendix D to the staff report be referred to Council for approval. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Caitlin. Committee, any questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, does the applicant, owner, or their agent wish to speak to the application?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Bob Clark. I'm the planner for the applicant, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions. I believe that the staff report has been very complete and thoroughly done.
Thank you. Committee, any questions of Mr. Clark at this time? All right, seeing none. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak to the application? Anyone from the public wishing to speak to the application? Going to call a third and final time. Anyone from the public wishing to speak to the application? All right, seeing and hearing none. Committee, after considering all the comments provided today, what is your recommendation to council? Member O'Reilly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the recommendation to amend the report plan 2023-061 to amend the Township Mariposa zoning bylaw 94-07 at 238 Black School Road be received. And that is zoning bylaw respecting application D06 2023-023 substantially in the form attached as Appendix D to report plan 2023-061 be approved for adoption by council, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute any documents and agreements required by the approval of this application.
Seconder, Councillor Warren. Any discussion? Calling the question. All in favor? Carries. Thank you. Item 3.2, Plan 2023-062, an application to amend the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw 94-07 at 332 Kawartha Lakes Road 46, Oakwood. Caitlin, go ahead.
Thank you. This next application on the docket is another zoning bylaw amendment, as just mentioned, to amend the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw. This application was submitted by Clark Consulting Services for the property municipally known as 332 County Road 46. The subject property is designated as a prime agricultural and environmental protection under the city's official plan. And the property is zoned as agricultural A1 zone under the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw 94-07. The purpose of this particular zoning bylaw amendment application is also to fulfill conditions of provisional consent approval, which was granted on March 2nd of 2023. The consent application proposed to sever a roughly 0.82 hectare surplus farm dwelling parcel from roughly 38 hectares of retained agricultural land, which is to be consolidated with a non-abutting agricultural parcel. As a condition of consent, the retained agricultural land is to be rezoned to prohibit future residential uses. This particular application is also proposing to rezone the severed surplus farm dwelling parcel to recognize the new lot size and residential use, and will subsequently rezone a water course on the subject property with a 30-meter buffer to protect the water course. In support of the application, WSP received a sketch, a planning justification report, a complete application form, and a copy of the conditions of provisional consent approval. In accordance with Planning Act requirements, notice was circulated to residents within 500 meters of the subject site, and the application was circulated to relevant external agencies and internal departments, including engineering, building and septic division, Kawartha Conservation. Diving into the policy review, the growth plan, again, provides a framework for long-term protection of prime agricultural lands. Rezoning to prohibit future residential uses on the retained parcel is consistent with the intent of the growth plan policies to protect agricultural lands in the long term. The growth plan also recognizes the importance of protecting hydrologic features and their functions, and the rezoning of the water course on site with a 30-meter buffer is consistent with the intent of these growth plan policies to protect hydrologic features. The PPS also lays out a framework for protection of prime agricultural areas, and lot creation is permitted for a resident surplus to a farming operation as part of farm consolidation, provided that further residential use is not permitted on the retained lands. In this case, the application meets this PPS criteria for residential lot creation within a prime agricultural area, and rezoning to prohibit residential uses in the retained land will protect the ongoing agricultural operations. The PPS also lays out a framework for protecting and improving the quality and quantity of water resources and protection of natural heritage features. Rezoning of the water course on site with this 30-meter buffer is consistent with these policies of the PPS. Under the city's official plan, the subject site is designated as prime agricultural and environmental protection. The rezoning of the water course on site will protect the water course and complement the existing environmental protection designation in the official plan. The city's official plan also prescribes criteria regarding the severing of a dwelling surplus to a farming operation. This application meets that criteria in that the severed lot does not exceed 1 hectare. The surplus dwelling on the severed lot is not required for farm employees. And further, an MDS setback is not required, as this is associated with a rezoning of severed or retained parcels as the result of a severance for a resident surplus to a farming operation. Ultimately, the agricultural land will be preserved by prohibiting any future residential uses through the rezoning on this lot. Under the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw, the subject site is designated as agricultural or A1 zone. This zoning bylaw amendment proposes to replace the general or the agricultural A1 zone with an agricultural exception 42 on the retained lands. This exception zone is being implemented with an express prohibition of future residential uses. Subsequently, the severed surplus farm dwelling lot will be rezoned from agricultural A1 to rural residential type 1 or RR1 to recognize the new lot size as a result of the severance and the existing residential use. The watercourse on the subject property will be rezoned from the agricultural A1 zone to environmental protection with a 30-meter buffer to protect the existing water feature. Development engineering, building and septic plans examiner provided comments before the drafting of the staff report indicating no issues, and the supervisor part 8 sewage systems also provided comments indicating that the private services review was completed during the consent application and there are no additional concerns. One comment was received from a local resident. This resident merely just requested clarification on the nature of the zoning bylaw amendment and wanted to know whether their property would be directly impacted. In summary, staff feel that this application is consistent with the PPS and conforms to policies detailed in the growth plan as well as the city's official plan. Further, staff feel that the rezoning is appropriate and will fulfill the conditions of provisional consent approval. Staff respectfully recommend that the zoning bylaw amendment included as Appendix D to the staff report be referred to council for approval. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Caitlin. Committee, any questions at this time? Seeing none, does the applicant, owner, or their agent wish to speak to the application?
Again, Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Committee, any questions to Mr. Clark at this time? Okay, seeing none. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak to the application? Anyone from the public wishing to speak to the application? Third and final time, anyone from the public wishing to speak to the application? Seeing and hearing none, committee, you've heard the comments. What is your recommendation for council? Mayor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move it as printed.
Motion by Mayor Elmsley, the report plan 2023-062, amend the Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw 94-07 at 332 Kawartha Lakes Road 46 be received, that a zoning bylaw respecting application D06-2023-024 substantially in the form attached as Appendix D to report plan 2023-062 be approved for adoption by council, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute any documents and agreements required by the approval of this application. Seconder for the motion, Deputy Mayor Richardson. Any discussion? All in favor? Carries. Thank you. At this point, this public meeting being held under the Planning Act is now adjourned. Brings us to item 4, deputations, which I believe we have none, Joel. Item 5, correspondence, which I believe we have none. Item 6 is regular and returned reports. Item 6.1, municipal infrastructure design guidelines and annual update. Christina Sisson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the committee. The annual update for the infrastructure guidelines this year includes some components, including the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks has now granted us the Consolidated Linear Infrastructure Environmental Compliance approval. That did occur last year and then was updated this year as well. This is a form of pre-authorization for the construction of certain municipal infrastructure, vis-a-vis being the sanitary sewer system, which can include force mains and pump stations, and also the storm and stormwater management. As a result, the ministry had some additional updates to their guidelines for this pre-authorization type work. So we've included those in our website, but we also have references that we want to make through the water, wastewater sections of our guidelines. And this is just a way, as can be seen through the report, we've seen an increase in uptake and interest in looking at our guidelines. It's a great way to feed the information out to the consultants ahead of time to say this is what we need. And in this way, what we hope to do is be able to actually receive more complete submissions. I can't promise anything, but we are trying in that way. I have over the last month or so been thinking of some other ways to actually streamline the process. And through that, with the authority from the ministry, we now have that availability similar to the water distribution system that we have with our licensing program. It's very similar in terms of how that process is rolled out. The stormwater management criteria are similar to what we already had in our guidelines. They also do refer to low impact development. And one suggestion has been made that we look at low impact development and all the different references to that in an effort to try to streamline receiving more planning applications, engineering designs that include low impact development. Low impact development, just in summary, is typically try to keep the water that falls on the property on that same property now. We don't want to have to treat it downstream. We want to try and keep as much water going back into the ground. We do have to remember we do have some tight soils, and that's not always possible. But it really is trying to encourage things on individual properties as opposed to larger municipal infrastructure required later down the line. So we've been working on that for a number of years, and with this additional approval through the ministry, it's going to give us more ability to take people straight back to the guidelines to say, this is what you need to do. This is our environmental approval. This is what you need to do to add another stormwater management pond, additional storm sewer, or any oil grit separators, etc. The other components were we'd had some conversations with respect to manhole lids, maintenance lids. And what happens is when the base course asphalt goes on, that lid is at the same level as the base. But then through construction, et cetera, when we go to put the top course on, they typically raise the iron, is our sort of pedantic way of saying it, but we raise the iron, and what happens is then not always does that asphalt completely meet the rim of the maintenance hole. And so over time, both in capital and development, it's been recognized that this can cause a bit of an issue in conversations with Public Works, et cetera. So we're trying to ensure that we get the infrastructure in the best form possible and that it lasts as long as possible, right? So just as an aside, if it's either too low or too high, then we have the perspective of we're actually causing friction on that, pounding, et cetera, and we want to avoid that. So in general, there has already been established through the capital program a tolerance, and now we're adopting that tolerance into the development guidelines as well. And this is a way to keep everybody accountable at the end when we're trying to get the inspections completed, assumed, et cetera. So the only other, there was a small item whereby there's been some confusion between the Ontario provincial standards and our own standards with respect to the concrete for curb and sidewalk specifications. We just aligned that to go back to the Ontario provincial standards. That way we're all working from the same page. Finally, the other item in the roads section was a 26-meter right-of-way. And the 26-meter right-of-way we've always had for collector and arterial roads. Typically on a collector arterial, you wouldn't allow entrances. However, we have a lot of roads that are being proposed through development that are actually arterial and collector as well. In an effort to provide the traffic calming and the safety provisions, et cetera, to have entrances on those collectors and arterials, a median has been proposed. And we've adopted our own concept plan to try to align with some of the development pressure we're receiving to have a 26-meter right-of-way with an actual median as well. Now, we're looking at that from a couple of perspectives. As I say, the traffic calming is certainly part of it. The safety, it's a lot easier to back out into the traffic as everybody does versus into 2 lanes of traffic. So the median will certainly help with those safety concerns. But the other perspective that we wanted to look at this from is the opportunity to try to green up the canopy, provide a little bit more space potentially for trees, et cetera. Also maybe provide some area for low impact development. But we're presenting it as a concept right now because we don't have a lot of detailed design on this particular item right now. We do have our LID cross section as well, which doesn't deal with a median. It's for local roads as well. So we're just trying to stay in alignment with the current development pressure that we're seeing, with the current designs that we're seeing. We've taken a look at Oshawa and some of the ways that they've incorporated it there. And I think we have some ability here to work with that particular cross-section. Again, we need to look at it from a design perspective first before we get into any additional details with respect to long-term monitoring, operations, and maintenance. That's not the discussion today. Today we're talking about design. So if anybody has any questions on any of those components?
Any questions for Christine at this time? Councillor Warren?
Through you. Thank you, Christine. Something that I forgot to ask you previously. Through all this design, is it possible to get wider roads for multi-use paths? I know that's coming from EAC and then the Active Transportation Master Plan. So is this the right venue to ask that question?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor and to the committee. Indeed, we already have the 26-meter platform that allows for the sidewalk on one side and the multi-use trail on the other. So it is part of our current suite of cross-sections. One item that has been talked about more recently is whether there is enough room within a local 20-meter right-of-way to actually accommodate both, or whether you would forego one for the other. The challenge there, again, I would like to stick to design components and the actual implementation as opposed to monitoring, operating, and maintaining, because those are two separate streams of conversation, typically with respect to responsibility and cost. Right? So right now we're looking at different options as they come in with respect to different designs that are coming to us.
Thank you for that. And just with the median, how do you visualize that? Do you think that would be possibly turf or possibly pollinator, low pollinator gardens, that sort of thing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor and committee. I think the key here is to ensure that what we do provides the best opportunity to meet the ministry requirements, the Conservation Authority requirements, and our own municipal requirements for water balance. So that would certainly suggest plants that are more likely to absorb water. The challenge that we have, and the reason that we didn't want to get into specifics, is I think every stretch of a median has the potential to have different surfaces on it. There may be opportunities where it's closer to a crosswalk or closer to pedestrian traffic, where it might make more sense for us to even contemplate, and again, bear with me, these are design concepts that I recognize it's often difficult to embrace change, but there may be an opportunity to have, say for instance, more porous pavement or paving stones. So we don't want to really get stuck or caught up in a specific surface type until we truly understand the nature of the neighborhood, the nature of where that particular section is, right, in terms of the road network, whether it makes more sense if there's a need for a street light there or we're closer to an intersection. We need to understand if there's going to be any, challenges with respect to storing water, draining the water. So this is why I'm saying it's a concept today. We need to embrace change. We need to embrace this cross-section because, as I say, it's coming to me as, engineering design. So I need to be able to say we're okay with this, with all of your discretion and allowance. But at the same time, I want to make sure that prudent engineering design is utilized to design that median. Because the more prudent the design, the easier it's going to be for me to have that discussion, shall we say, with respect to monitoring, operating, and maintaining that particular median. Because that's typically where we've had some, different discussions as to who should be responsible. And clearly, certain surfaces might be more responsible by a certain group versus vegetative ones. I'm also not aware to date how this will be embraced by the community itself. It's not an unusual thing where community groups might help with the maintenance, particularly of, low impact development, gardens, et cetera. The challenge I want to ensure is make sure the safety is still maintained in terms of, height of plants, location of plants, and that's where it really comes down to the intersection designs. How close are we at the various points? Are we looking at a collector to collector intersection versus collector to local? I could play all day with engineering design, but I think the key here is to get the concept in and then work through to get prudent engineering design that is actually backed with what is the recommended monitoring, operations, and maintenance requirement. Does that help?
It does, so it's fluid, so you might have semi-permeable or permeable paving, whatever, for low-impact development. It's very expensive, but so depending on the subdivision and its needs, but to bring in low-impact development, be it either that or anything but turf grass. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, what are your wishes? Counselor Warren?
To receive?
Motion to receive. Seconder? Member Barkwell? Any discussion? Receive is printed. Yep. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carries. Thank you. Item 6.2, 2024 subdivision agreement template update. Christina?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to committee. We went through an extensive update to the subdivision agreement template last year. It was upheld this year. So this year, what we're looking at for 2024 is the Schedule D component. The Schedule D is the actual engineering cost estimate that comes in for all the municipal infrastructure that is proposed for the subdivision. And at this time, we're looking to only increase one number, and that would be the contingency percentage. Currently, the contingency percentage is at 5%, and that 5% is calculated on all of the municipal infrastructure that's proposed. And then as reductions have occurred, that contingency number has gone down with the approval acceptance of the infrastructure as we go along with reductions. This is different in that we would like to increase that contingency to 10%. As well, we would like that contingency to reflect the initial cost estimate and be held to the end of the development. So that's post-assumption. Typically, I would come to this particular committee, bring an assumption report with a draft bylaw that would then go to council, and then once that bylaw is registered, that's the point at which we would do any, final security reductions. What we're looking at this contingency is to use it as a slight buffer to inflation, to some of the cost increases, to some of the things that we don't have control over. We do an annual review of the cost estimate of the material, but it's still typically based on what the initial dollar value was. So that's one component of it. And certainly another component of it is to ensure that the parties that are investing in our community to create this infrastructure also have their invested security dollars with us to complete the project. If there are any questions?
Mayor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So just so I'm getting this right, we're going from 5% to 10%, and we're not going to reduce it during the course of the construction, and we're holding the 10% right till the end. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor and committee, correct.
So I guess my concern is that doubling the cost at this stage may have a negative effect on building. And did we take that into consideration? And did we consider maybe holding the 5% until the end, or going partway at 7.5%? And I guess the other portion, I'm looking at the items on page 42, 43, and 44 of the report. I don't see where the 10% would be applied. So.
Through Mr. Chair, to the mayor and committee. So it would be on all of those numbers as it's currently calculated at the 5%. All those numbers are zero right now because it's a template and people put in their value as they, 30 meters of 300 millimeter diameter pipe, et cetera. That would all go in there. So this is just our template that we use on our website, and I felt that was the easiest one to present to you. We typically would receive it from a developer, if they've gone through pre-servicing with a potential for reduction on the other side. So right now, that 10% would be applied the same as the 5%. The difference would be it would not be subject to any reduction as we went along in the process. And one of the components of the engineering specifically is the idea that if you actually go to do the work, vis-a-vis you want to, update the design or actually implement the works that are being proposed through this infrastructure, that's the only place there's any dollar value for that activity. The rest of the cost estimate is based on the infrastructure, the actual product, not the work required to then implement. So we're looking at, should the municipality need to step in and complete those works, we need the dollar value to cover the cost, any of the people costs, any of the design costs, if we have to hire for additional review of any of the work. So if we had to do boreholes, for instance, of any of the asphalt or do any camera work. So it's a little bit more than just the infrastructure and the 10%. And from the perspective of that increase, the perspective from our side is that we've been low for a number of years, right? And this is only for the go forward in the 2024 for anybody coming in for a new agreement.
Follow up. Thank you for that. I guess it not only applies, it also applies, for instance, to landscaping, doesn't it? Certain landscaping features of a build. I'm thinking of one I was familiar with a couple of years ago, and it was somewhat onerous on the operator who he wasn't a large builder. He was building a one of, and he had substantial money tied up that he couldn't get back until he satisfied the drainage through landscaping and other items that were necessary, and it impacted his ability to do other things. My question is, it not only applies to large-scale developments, it applies to smaller developments as well, and would any consideration be given either with doing it for larger corporations, but smaller builds, either reduce it as it goes along or keep it at its same level, but retain the 5% to the end?
So thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor and Committee. I'm not sure exactly the example, but this is only for subdivisions. And we typically only do subdivisions if we're 5, 6 lots and up. So we haven't suggested changing our Schedule D. I don't believe it's a Schedule D when we put it in a site plan agreement, but I'm not suggesting any changes to the site plan process, more so when people are putting, landscaping and things there. What we do under a subdivision is a tree planting plan or a streetscape plan, we typically call it. That might mean that, in general, there may be a tree per lot, but sometimes there's additional infrastructure that, streetlights or signage or a curb, something that gets in the way of that particular planting. So there may be more plantings at the intersection or at a trailhead, something like that. So that's all vetted as well. So the cost of the actual vegetation isn't being accounted for here. This is more if we had to go and redesign that streetscape plan for some reason, we might have to utilize that. But again, I think the key here is that it's an engineering fee if we need it. And the hope is that we wouldn't. And over the years, various suggestions have been made for how do we keep development moving in a timely manner. I've made it quite clear that we're not able to predict, control the market. So the next best mechanism really is to help with time. And my previous report was to help with time. Let's hope that you can get your design through in a reasonable time frame by us telling you exactly what we need from you. And now it's also the financial component. Let's hope that the investment is such that you have a higher interest in completing your work in a timely fashion such that you can then receive those security dollars back in a timely fashion.
Deputy Mayor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thank you, Manager Sisson. I guess you answered a couple of my questions with that explanation, actually, looking at, the cost to complete that work at the end of the project. You did mention that there's other municipalities that have had to, go forward with this type of increase as well, just because of inflationary issues. And I think it's more of a security for, the city as we do build out these subdivisions. I just was wondering, have you, in comparison, how do we look with other municipalities?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Deputy Mayor Richardson and committee. Certainly, there are a variety of numbers out there, and my challenge is always to have regard for what might be available online versus what's actually implemented. So this is certainly within the realm, and this is why we looked at this number.
Member O'Reilly.
Tracy's asked, mainly the question I was going to ask too, there's kind of an industry standard out there. The other thing, maybe instead of just, maybe could we call it Bill Curnew security policy?
Member Barkwell.
Thank you very much, Christina. So basically the change you're asking for or recommending is that the amount that's retained by the city goes from 5% to 10%, and that instead of having some of that go back to the developer as things are completed, that it actually be held on until the end, until the subdivision has been completed to inspection and satisfaction. So I just wonder if this is an additional hardship as the mayor was mentioning, to developers to have to put this actual dollars aside and not be able to get any of it back until completion. And just if you can give me just kind of an idea of how much money per unit to be developed, housing unit, approximately how much would the developer have to put forward in cash to be retained until completion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Barkwell and the committee. I haven't done my cost accounting for how much per lot in a little while, but it was around the $60,000 per lot. Not maybe 5 years ago. I really should check this again. I think the bigger item to consider here is that this is not in addition to any other increases being proposed. And I think from the perspective of the municipality, this is a matter of, risk aversion and also the cost of doing business. So we're not proposing to increase fees at this time. We have our fees on an every other year schedule to be reviewed, and that would be next year. And the current development pressure and the cost of some of that development pressure at the same time as inflation and potential changes in the market necessitate the municipality to be proactive, in our opinion, to ensure we have that security. This is something that would be added on to the borrow-on amount, security amount. And so from that perspective, we're not talking, 50% or anything dramatic like that. But that, again, that's our opinion. And it's really in line with trying to ensure that the municipality in the future years does not face challenges with respect to the completion and the ultimate assumption of the developments that are currently being proposed in our community, given the scale of those developments, right? These aren't 20-lot subdivisions any longer. These are now 200, 400, units. So I think the scale, from that perspective, it's only prudent with the municipality to ensure that we're protecting ourselves as well. If it's not necessary, that will be really good news.
So just so I understand, so the 10% that you're talking about is 10% of 60,000. So it'd be approximately 6,000 per housing unit would be the security?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Barkwell. I would like to check those numbers myself, but in general, if a lot was going to cost before around 60,000, and that number was fairly even whether it was rural or urban, because for the same stretch, for the same number of lots, you have less infrastructure in the rural, right? So the cost, you have fewer lots, I should say, in the rural scenario than you do in the urban. So yes, that would be, it's a fairly good estimate of where we would have been.
Thank you very much. I'm comfortable with that.
Director Hawley?
Yes, thank you. So I think it's kind of hard for Manager Sisson to sort of say on a lot by lot basis what that cost would be. I mean, obviously we're getting a lot more dense development nowadays, so I think the 5% really is really stretched out over a larger number of units. So from an impact perspective on a per unit basis, it's not really that much. And I think the other way to look at it is it's kind of a bit of a gentle push to the development community to try to get some of these projects moving quickly so that we can move on with the assumption process rather than having some of these projects lag for a long period of time. And the other way I would look at it is, you know, we're getting a different development community or a different developer into the community. They're used to these types of security requirements. I'm not going to say it's not a big deal for them, but they are used to it, and you know they pay those in other jurisdictions as well. So I don't think it's really putting that much of a hardship on them. So that would be my comment in this. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor Richardson?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. And I guess that's kind of where I was wrapping up, just looking at all the question and dialogue right now is, you know, we're looking at that scale of development, but we also have to be prudent and protect our municipality as we move forward. So I'm in agreement. I mean, this wouldn't have come to us if it wasn't needed. So I believe that it is properly needed. So I support it.
Councillor Warren?
Through you, I'll just move the recommendation as printed. I think it's going to speed up development. I think it's, as Deputy Mayor has said, it's a good move and it does protect us. Thank you.
Seconder for the motion, Deputy Mayor Richardson. Any discussion? All in favor? Carries. Item 6.3, engineering 2023-028, pre-servicing of subdivision lands, policy CP 2018-09, updates and recommendations for 2024. Christina?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the committee. I've been before you a couple of times recently with updates to the pre-servicing policy. And the current update is really to recognize that some of the development now is being proposed in areas where we have municipal drains. And so what we need to do is ensure prior to any earthworks occurring, any works at all occurring on the draft plan approved properties, that we understand any impacts to the Municipal Drain and the Drainage Act legislation. So this could mean, you know, alterations, it could mean any cost requirements, any reporting, et cetera. Again, this is to ensure that it's a reminder that we make sure that we check on any requirements under the Drainage Act prior to approving works within areas of the catchment of or the actual location of the municipal drain. Any questions?
Any questions for Christina? Member O'Reilly?
I think the chair of the drainage board should speak to this.
I'm in favor. Anything that keeps him away from a drainage board meeting. Deputy Mayor Richardson,
Thank you, and through you, Chair. These are 3 great updates, and as you said, we'll be pushing them out into our website. Do we on our website say, new, or how we, promote that we've done some updates? Just curious on that component.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Deputy Mayor Richardson and the committee. We have a listing of where we've done updates, and every year our guidelines on our website are dated. So these improvements today will all go on as a 2024 version, and in that way we always guide everybody that's coming to us to make sure that they're looking for the annual updates, so the most recent ones. But at the same time, we have a section on the website that actually lists what we changed in any given year. So in case somebody's using, it does happen, your midstream design, you're using our 2021 guidelines. It's unfortunate, but then we have to make sure that we're staying current. And certainly with some of the, approvals through the Ministry of Environment, we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and that has equalized people across the province a little better as well. So again, they should be familiar, but it's just a matter of having to remind people.
Any further questions? If there's, Christina, go ahead.
So through you, Mr. Chair, at least one of the more recent subdivisions was closer to $50,000 per lot, the cost of the infrastructure versus the lot. So that was one of the more recent ones in Bubcaygeon. I just thought if I could have an opportunity there to provide an update. So I'm just trying to see, I was looking for something a little bit more recent, but that's as close as I can get at the moment. If you'd like a follow-up, I can always provide that. Thank you.
Okay, Member O'Reilly.
I'm not sure that's a good example, because everybody that works in Bobcaygeon digs in the rock. So the infrastructure is definitely more expensive out there.
Christina?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you can indulge me just one more time, I do have a number for Craft Phase 1, which is here in Lindsay, north of Colborne, east of Highway 35, and for the 215 lots there, the total cost was around $14 million, which equates to $65,000 per lot. So we're all within a reasonable amount. I wasn't too far off with the 60, but anyway. Thank you for indulging me.
Okay, if there's no further questions of Christina, is there a motion? Deputy Mayor Richardson?
I'll move it as printed.
Seconder? Councillor Warren? Any further discussion? All in favor? That carries. And before we ask for adjournment, how many legacy subdivisions do we have off the top of your head? Just as a reminder, as we're talking about costs and everything, and how old is the oldest one? 60 years?
We are, thank you, Director Hawley. Through you, Mr. Chair, to yourself and the committee, we have what we call legacy projects, which remained languishing or not active for a number of years. So that would be more what I would call some of the legacy projects. Then we have approvals that we seemingly grant extensions to, and or let's keep them going for a number of times. And those are almost more challenging sometimes, because they haven't started building, but they want to build, but everything they've done is based on very old approvals and might not meet our current requirements. So certainly we have a good range in all of the subdivision types that we have of those, but from the perspective of registered subdivisions, where they've already begun to build homes and where we are trying to get them to the assumption process, we really are only down to, I want to say maybe 3. I know of 2, but we're down to about 3 of those. For draft plan approvals that are being sort of, let's use the term resurrected, those ones, there are a handful more. I have been looking for a list, which I would like to see from planning, because some of them may predate my knowledge of these files as well. So again, though, I think the current line of thinking is let's really bring everybody to the table with the same consistent guidelines. And it's part of the reason as well that we do the annual updates, because the moment we stop having regard for what needs to change year over year, we allow some of those, I want to call them slippages in the system, but some of those scenarios where you may possibly allow a previous infrastructure guideline that you really can't meet now. So we not only are trying to stay current to, you know, the ministry requirements and the municipal requirements and that type of thing, but at the same time, we're also trying to stay true to the industry standard. And as Director Hawley referred to earlier, we are dealing with a different group of development communities that want to enter into our world now. So the challenge really is to say, well, if you were able to do that in X municipality, and I've gone and witnessed an X municipality, or I've been involved in another, you know, in another career at some point doing those works, then I don't see that there's any difference to our community. So that's really what we're trying to do, is lay a playing field out there that works. But I will tell you that we're working to have more assumptions in an effort to be able to focus our energies on the new development coming in, because it's recognized as the newer, potentially more affordable units. Does that help?
No, that's fine. I would, when we keep going back to costs, I guess what my point was, and I was being a little facetious or whatever, right, that we have more than our share of developers that, you know, want to develop and said they're going to develop and have now been 20, 30, 40, 50 years and no shovel on the ground. So when we're having that conversation about cost and an undue burden to certain developers, there's also a cost to the taxpayer for some of these old legacy plans that, you know, somebody wants to develop, but we've taken 50 years to dip our toe in the water. Motion for adjournment, anyone? Mayor Elmsley, second by Councillor Warren, all in favor, carries. Thanks.